April of 1887. The wagon rode into the Sweetwater country, climbed for a full day before it gave up the ranch, and Eliza Calder rode the last mile of it standing in the bed of a borrowed buckboard so she could see what was now hers. She had counted on land. She had not counted on the graves. They sat on a low rise east of the house, inside a fence of split rail gone silver with weather, and even from the road she could read them as graves because the crosses leaned, every one of them tipped a few degrees east, bowed under years of the same prairie wind that was pushing on her hair now. She counted without meaning to. It was a habit from a girl who had kept her dead father's account books. 13 crosses, dark and lichen-spotted and clearly old, and one more at the far end, set apart, pale new wood, the dirt at its foot turned and dark and not yet healed over with grass. 14 markers. One of them new. Elisa had buried a husband and a mother and an infant brother in her 26 years, and she knew the difference at a glance between a grave that had settled and a grave that had been opened that week. The man who had driven her up from the depot was a hired neighbor named Otis Pruitt, and when she asked him whose plot that was, he kept his eyes on the mules. "Calder ground," he said. "Old family. They've been here longer than the brand has." "And the new one?" Eliza asked. "The pale board at the end?" Otis worked his jaw a moment and chewed on whatever he'd been about to say until it was gone. "Couldn't tell you, missus." He flicked the reins, though the mules were already walking. "Wasn't dug by anybody I'd care to name. I can pay for an honest answer." "There's no answer that's both, ma'am," he said, and looked at the road, and that was the end of the conversation. She should explain how she came to own a ranch she had never seen. Her husband, Thomas Calder, had inherited it from an uncle and meant to bring her west in the spring. Instead, he took a fever in February and died in 3 days in a rented room in Omaha, and the lawyer who read his will read her name into the deed of a place 1,400 miles away that Thomas himself had never walked. Sweetwater Crossing had assumed his widow would do the sensible thing a widow does: sell to the one man with money to buy and go home. The only man with money to buy was Mr. Halloran Sykes, and Eliza met him before she had unpacked. He came up the road next morning in a glossy black buggy, a tall, silver-haired man in a good black frock coat, and he climbed down and took off his hat and held it against his chest like a man at a funeral. "Mrs. Calder," he said, "I am sorrier for your loss than I have words for. I knew your husband's uncle. A hard country took a fine family." He had brought a basket, real coffee, a tin of peaches, a loaf still warm, and he set it on the porch rail with a care that made the gift feel heavier than it was. "You're kind," she said, and meant it as a question. "I'm practical," Sykes answered, and smiled, and the smile was warm and reached his eyes, which was the part that would trouble her later. "This is no place for a woman alone. I'll give you a fair price, fairer than fair, and you'll be back among Christian people before the heat comes. I've drawn the papers already. I took the liberty." He laid a folded deed of sale on the rail beside the peaches. Eliza looked at the papers and did not touch them. "You drew them before you'd met me," she said. "I drew them the day I heard Thomas Calder had passed." He said it as a kindness. He did not hear how it landed. "There's a new grave on my hill," she said. "Fresh dug. Whose is it?" And for 1/2 of 1 second the warmth drained out of Halloran Sykes's face, and what looked back at her was a card player who has just watched the wrong man turn over the wrong hand. Then the smile came back, unhurried, complete. These old plots, they fill up over the years. I wouldn't go disturbing the dead, Mrs. Calder. Sign the paper. Let me carry this off your shoulders. I'll think on it, she said. Don't think too long. Country's hard on a woman who lingers. He left the basket. He left the deed. He drove away, and she stood on the porch a long time and did not sign. That afternoon she walked up the rise alone. The 13 old crosses each had a name, weathered but readable, if you knelt and ran a thumb along the grooves. Mary Calder, Josiah Calder, an infant only marked baby, and a year, a whole family planted across 40 years, the founding bones of the brand she'd inherited. And at the end, a careful pace apart, the 14th. It was new pine, plain smooth, and a name had been burned into the crossbar with a hot iron in clean block letters, and the name was Eliza Calder. Below it, a single line, born, and then the year of her own birth, 1861, which no one out here could have known without going looking for it. After that, a dash and a blank where the second year would go, and below it, fresh-turned earth in the exact dimensions of a person. She did not faint. She had buried too many people to be sentimental about a board. She knelt and put 2 fingers in the loose dirt, felt how recently it had been broken, and understood that someone had dug a grave for a living woman and carved her into it as a promise, not a threat scratched in haste, a thing built by somebody who had taken the trouble to learn the year she was born. A widow can't run a ranch, the town would say. A widow alone up the Sweetwater will sell by July. They had a name for what they expected of her, and the name was gone. But there is a difference between a woman they expect to leave and a woman they have already buried in advance. She brushed the dirt from her knees, slowly, and looked a long time at the burned letters of her own name. And when she turned and walked back down the rise, her step had changed. She was not going to sell. She was going to find out who needed her dead on paper and why. The why was the part that made no sense, and she turned it over all that week. If Sykes wanted the land was for sale. She was a widow with no kin, no money to fight him, every reason to take his price and run. A man who wanted ground that badly did not need a corpse. He needed a signature. So why a grave? Why her name, her true birth year, the trouble of an iron and a plain board? You did not build a thing like that to frighten a woman into selling. You built it for the day after she was gone. She started in town because the answer to a question about land lives in a courthouse. Sweetwater Crossing was one dusty street and a church and a land office with a window of wavy glass, and the clerk behind it was a soft, round man named Buford Teague, who did not want to look up the Calder section. "Records are closed for the audit," he told her, not meeting her eye. "What audit?" "County audit. Can't say when it lifts." He shuffled his paper that did not need shuffling. "You'd do better to come back in the fall or have your lawyer write." "I don't have a lawyer," Eliza said, "and I won't be here in the fall, because by the fall a man named Sykes intends me to be dead." That brought his eyes up at last. She set both hands flat on his counter. "My husband's name is on that deed, and my name is under his. You will show me the plat, Mr. Teague, or you will explain to a federal land agent why a widow could not see her own title." There's no call for federal anybody." "Then there's no call to make me ask twice." She did not know if there was a federal agent within 300 miles. Teague did not know either. He brought the book, The plat told her two things. The Calder Ranch was 4 sections of deeded ground, which she had known, and it sat across the only year-round water for a long way in any direction, which she had not. And running a finger north along the survey lines, she found the second thing, a penciled notation in the margin, recent in a different hand, a docket number, and 3 words. Survey, Rail Reserve. What's a rail reserve, Mr. Teague? His throat moved. Nothing's decided. I didn't ask what was decided, I asked what it was. There's talk of a survey. Talk only. Nothing's filed, nothing's decided, and I'd thank you not to repeat that you heard it here. But a man who says nothing's decided 3 times in one breath has decided that you should not know what he knows. And Eliza thanked him sweetly and walked out and stood in the street and understood the size of the thing she'd ridden into. A railroad does not pay a widow's price for water it intends to cross. A railroad pays for the legal strip to lay its track, and it pays the recorded owner, and it pays a great deal. She still did not have the shape of it, only pieces. A grave, a smiling man, a survey line, a stretch of water worth more than peaches. The piece that joined them she found 3 days later. Because of a dog. There was an old yellow ranch dog named Ruff who had come with the place and decided Eliza belonged to him. On the 3rd evening, he would not stop barking at the spring house down by the creek, a low stone hut over the water where the family had kept milk cold for 40 years. And Eliza took the lantern and went down expecting a snake. What she found was a man. He was crouched at the spring with a tin cup, drinking, and he came up fast when the light hit him, and for a bad moment they took the measure of each other across 10 feet of dark. Tall, broad through the shoulders, a short dark beard, a tan wide-brim hat pushed back, a range coat gone pale at the seams, and tired gray-blue eyes that held the lantern steady and did not flinch from it. A coil of rope hung at his hip. Nothing else did. He wore no gun that she could see, and she marked the empty belt and filed it with everything else she had counted since the road in. "This is my water," Eliza said. Her voice did not shake, which surprised her. "I know whose water it is, ma'am." He set the cup down slow and showed her his hands. "Name's Wade Harlan. I rode for the Calder brand 4 years before Sykes ran me off the country. I've been camped up the draw a week." He nodded once toward the rise she could not see in the dark, toward the graves. "I'm the one dug that 14th hole." She had 1,000 questions, and only one came out. "Why?" she said. "Because the man who told me to dig it told me whose name was going on the board," Wade said, "and I quit him in the middle of it and left it unfinished, and I've been waiting up that draw to tell whoever came that they best not stay." He dragged a hand down his face and let the silence run a moment before he went on. "I didn't carve your name, ma'am. I only broke the ground. I didn't know it'd be a woman, and when I knew I put the spade down and walked off the only wages in this country. But I'll tell you straight, Halloran Sykes means for you to be in that hole." The wind moved the creek grass. The dog had stopped barking and sat between them now as if he had introduced them. "Then you'll tell me the rest of it," Eliza said, "and you'll do it at my table where I can see your face." It was the most reckless thing she had ever said, but a man who confesses to digging your grave and then warns you off it is not the man you need to fear, and some animal part of her had already done that arithmetic. They sat at the kitchen table with the lamp between them, and Wade Harlan laid it out plain and slow, dressing nothing up. "Sykes don't want your ground," Wade said. "He wants the right-of-way, the strip the railroad buys to lay its track across your water, and that money goes to whoever's name is on the deed the day they file. That's the trick of it. If you sell to him, he's the recorded owner, and the railroad pays him and not the dead Calders. Clean enough, except you didn't sell. You stood on the porch, and you sent him off with his papers and words all over the country that the widow's digging in." He turned his cup in his hands. "A widow who won't sell is a problem, but a widow who dies up here alone, with no kin in the territory to make a fuss, her land falls to the county for the back taxes Sykes has been quietly buying up, and the county sells it to the only bidder, and the only bidder is him. He don't need your signature if you're gone. He needs you gone before the iron's filed. That grave ain't to scare you off. It's the next step, supposing the scaring don't work." "He carved my birth year," Eliza said. "How?" "He's got a man in the land office and a man in Omaha, and money enough to write to a church for a baptism date." Wade gave a short, weary breath that wasn't a laugh. "He's thorough. That's the whole of why he's dangerous. He smiles, and he buys peaches, and he files paper, and 3 counties of dead men thought he was a friend right up until the deed changed hands." "And you," Eliza said, "he trusted you with the spade. Why should I trust you with the truth?" "You shouldn't, on my word alone." Wade met her eyes across the lamp. "But a liar would have told you a comfort. I rode down here to tell you to run. You'd know that already if you meant to do it." Eliza sat very still and let it settle. A man who learns the year you were born is not bluffing, and a man who comes to warn you and gains nothing by it is not lying. "Then we don't outshout him," she said at last. "He's a paper man. We beat him with paper." Wade looked at her a long moment, and something in his tired face shifted. Not surprise exactly, but the look of a man who had come to talk a frightened woman onto a southbound stage and found instead that he was being recruited. "Go on," he said. What followed was the hardest 6 weeks of Eliza Calder's life, and not 1 hour of it was spent with a gun. She set Wade to the country he knew while she took the country she knew. He rode the draws and the section lines and brought back what was real, where the survey stakes stood, which of Sykes's men camped where, which neighbors owed Sykes money, and which only owed him fear. She rode to the county seat and sat in a hard chair outside the assessor's door until they let her copy the tax rolls, and there it was in his own paper trail. He had bought the delinquent taxes on her 4 sections the same week Thomas died. He had been waiting for a Calder to fall before her husband's body was cold. But buying the back taxes is not the same as owning the land, and she had read enough of her father's ledgers to know the difference. She laid it out for Wade at the table that night, a finger on the copied page. "He's bought the taxes, not the title. The law gives a delinquent owner a redemption period. I pay what's owed, and the deed comes back to me clean. That window doesn't close till autumn." "And if you pay it," Wade said slowly, following her finger, "he's got nothing. No foreclosure, no county sale. No quiet little auction with 1 bidder." She sat back. "Which is exactly why he can't let me live to autumn. The grave isn't a threat, Wade. It's a deadline." He was quiet a moment. "There's the one trouble in it. You don't have the money." "No," she said, "I don't." That was the wall, and she walked into it for 2 days before she found the way through, and the way through was the railroad. If the rail reserve was real, Its land agent would far rather pay a living owner for a clean crossing than buy a clouded title off a man at a tax sale that some heir might haul into court for years. So Eliza wrote a letter, in the plain, hard hand her father had taught her, to the land commissioner of the railroad in Cheyenne. She did not weep on the page. She enumerated a widow, the recorded owner of 4 sections across the only year-round water on the proposed line, presently the target of a scheme to clear her title by clearing her life. She asked for an advance against the crossing, enough to redeem the taxes, and she sent the same letter to the United States Land Office and to a Cheyenne newspaper, and said so plainly at the bottom of all 3. Then she gave the 4th copy to Wade Harlan to post in town before as many witnesses as the Land Office could hold, because a letter everyone has watched you send cannot be made to disappear, and a woman the whole county knows has written to the railroad and the government and the press has become very expensive to bury. Sykes came up the road one more time. He did not bring peaches. He came at dusk with 2 riders behind him and found the lamp lit in the window and Wade Harlan sitting on the porch step with the old yellow dog and a coil of rope across his knees. Eliza came out and stood in the doorway with a folded paper in her hand, and when she spoke, she did not raise her voice. "You've had a wasted drive, Mr. Sykes," she said. "I've redeemed the taxes. The draft from the railroad came through the bank at the county seat on Tuesday, against the right-of-way you were so careful not to mention. The title's clean, and it's mine, and there's a copy of every page of it, with a lawyer in Cheyenne, and another with the land office, and a third with a newspaper that found my story very interesting." She let that sit. They were particularly interested in the grave, the one with my name on it and my right birth year, the one your man dug before he quit you and came to me. For a moment the warmth did not come back over his face. Halloran Sykes simply looked at her, a man who had walked his whole life through dead men's affairs and had finally met a ledger he could not buy, and the thing under the smile showed itself plain in the lamplight. Then he gathered the smile up off the floor and put it back on, because it was the only tool he had ever truly owned. "You've made yourself a great deal of trouble for one season's water," he said quietly. "Land like this breaks people. It broke every Calder on that hill. They didn't have my ledger." Eliza did not move from the doorway. "And they didn't know they were being buried. I do. There's a difference, Mr. Sykes. A buried woman who knows the name of the man holding the spade." "You're a clever woman." "I'm a thorough one," Eliza said. "I learned it this month. From you." He looked at Wade. Wade looked back and did not stand and did not reach for anything, and that stillness said all that needed saying. "Evening, Mr. Sykes," Wade said. "Long way back in the dark?" And after a moment, because there was nothing on that porch for him to take, and a great many copies of his ruin already scattered across the territory, the land baron put on his crow-black hat and climbed into his buggy and drove down off the Sweetwater for the last time, and his 2 riders turned their horses and trailed off into the dark behind him without a word. In the morning, Eliza walked up the rise with a spade, and Wade walked up with her, and together they took out the 14th cross. She would not burn it. She had it planned down instead, the burned name sanded clean away, and she kept the blank board in the cool of the spring house. And when anyone asked her why she'd keep such a thing, she said only that a person ought to remember the week they decided not to die, the open grave they filled in level and let the prairie take back. The railroad came through 2 summers later, a single ribbon of iron laid across the lower quarter where the survey had always meant it to go, and it paid the recorded owner of the Sweetwater sections every dollar the crossing was worth. The recorded owner was Eliza Calder. She put the first of the money into fences and a new roof and a wage in Wade Harlan's pocket, for he had stayed on to gentle the horses and mend the silvered rail, and stayed on past the season he was needed, long after the place had stopped being a job to him and started being a home. They married in the autumn in the small church in Sweetwater Crossing, in front of the same town that had bet she'd be gone by July. It was not because she was alone and he was near. It was because each had seen the other choose the hard right road on a dark night when the easy wrong one stood open. He, when he dropped the spade in an unfinished grave and walked from the only money in the country; she, when she answered a confessed grave-digger by setting him a place at her table. People who meet like that are not easily parted afterward. She never did sell the ranch. She ran it for the better part of 40 years, and she ran it well. And the 13 old crosses on the rise she tended every spring, scrubbing the lichen from the grooves and reading the Calder names aloud, so the wind would not be the only thing that remembered them. There were always 13. There was never again a 14th. That had been the whole of the lie, that her name belonged among the dead, and she had answered it not with a gun but with a column of figures and a letter everyone could see, which is the quiet way the underestimated have always won the West. History does not record Halloran Sykes. He died some years later in a Denver hotel, land poor and friendless, a man whose every fortune had been built on the certainty that the people in his way would be too small or too frightened or too soon dead to read the paper he was so careful with. He was wrong about the widow on the Sweetwater. She read every line. If this story stayed with you, sit with it a moment before you go. Eliza Calder was written off before she ever set foot on her own land, buried on paper by a man who never imagined she'd do anything braver than weep and leave. So here's the question I'd love you to carry down to the comments. Have you ever had someone decide who you were and what you'd do before you'd said a single word, and then watch their certainty fall apart when you refused to play the part they'd cast for you? Tell me about it. I read them all. And if you want another story about the quiet ones the frontier underestimated, the widows and the strangers and the men written off, who turned out to be the only ones who ever truly belonged to the land, there's one waiting for you right here